So last week was fellowship.
Jesus Christ.
This week is forgiveness and salvation.
Hello and welcome to A God We Could Believe In, a frank and honest look at Christianity as we find it today. We're going to be looking at the things the church says and does that are embarrassing, confusing, or even downright offensive. In other religious contexts, your questions might be forbidden, but not here. So whether you're a lifelong churchgoer with the scars to prove it, or you've never entered a church and are just interested in the debate, this is a safe space for you. In that spirit, we're diving headlong into questions of sex and relationships, covering topics from marriage and purity to sexuality and masturbation. We'll also be looking at issues of gender, abuse, and identity, so listener discretion is advised. Please look after yourselves. Today is part one of looking at gender, sexuality, and the church. The dominant viewpoint within many church traditions is that there are two genders, male and female, and that men should play the leading role. If this is the hierarchy God intended, why do so many people not fit the mould? Can church communities create space for people who don't conform to traditional gender roles? In part two, we'll also be taking a deeper dive into the Bible to look at how gender and sexuality is talked about in Scripture and its interpretation. A quick parish notice, we are really aware that many of you will want us to cover LGBTQ+ inclusion in church communities. We're keen to talk about it too, but as a team we know we're lacking in the kind of lived experience needed to do the conversation justice. With that in mind, we'll be returning to the topic soon, in conversation with people who can speak directly from their lives, so please stay tuned. I'm Tim Woodson, and today I'm joined by biblical scholar Charlotte Naylor Davis, practical theologian Simon Hall, and poet, former social worker and daughter of Simon, Rachel Hall. So we are back today talking about gender and sexuality, which is going to be a nice gentle topic, as they have all been so far in this series. If you've read anything in the news, you'll probably understand that the Church of England in particular at the moment is quite publicly at a war with itself over this one. There is a flank of the kind of more conservative wing who are very much, there are two genders, male and female, and only they can get married. And then you have the progressive wing, which is saying that, nope, that's not true. There's a whole spectrum and people should be allowed to marry whoever they love. It's generally the tenor of the thing. And I think it's interesting for me because I felt like it kind of feels a little bit like the centre cannot hold on this one. There is a real tension there borne out in everyday experience. In every church, I think, must experience this on some level because there's a lot of variations on sexuality, people's experiences. Growing up in church, I definitely felt like I had to toe the line on sexuality. I think I remember like people asking me on the school bus, what did I think about gay people and gay marriage and stuff. But I'm ashamed to say I parroted the hate the sin, love the sinner line. You know, that was the vibe. That was what I felt like I had to. I mean, not with any real conviction. I just felt like people should be people. But I think as I've met more gay people or met more openly gay people, I think that really felt like less and less true each day, to feel like God had no love for these people. God's love might be contingent on whom they may or may not love. I mean, I definitely found like in church there were definitely people who stood out as being very much having stereotypical gay qualities, and I often felt like there was a reluctance to talk about it head on. So often these people were sort of living in plain sight. Everybody kind of knew, but didn't ever really get addressed, and that feels unhealthy. So I'm just interested to see what experiences you guys had in church.
I think starting with gender, I guess it felt very much like femininity was connected to servitude,
right?
And women would do the kids' work, and like men were the people leading, and the kind of subliminal kind of underbelly messaging of that is like male voices matter more and they are better at things that they attempt than I would be.
Right.
And I think just that, even if it's subconscious, that kind of innate understanding of being second best at everything because you're a woman is just slightly bizarre, and I think it's even weirder that we accepted it. But then I think there's also a concept of like the Christian man, which is like softer than your typical man, because he is like more emotional and he's like openly expressing love for God. So like that's kind of attractive and maybe a bit more of a feminine quality to like openly worship and openly express commitment and love to something. So I think that's an interesting idea of like, well, the Christian male friends I had were nothing like the boys that were in my class at school, or maybe they were, but like, you know, outwardly in church they were this kind of Christian version of masculinity, which is kind of slightly entirely separate. And I think I had a similar experience to you, Tim, about sexuality, of like knowing that it's there, but like I'm a youth worker currently and I work with young people now, and the amount of young girls that talk about their girlfriends, I'm like, what? Like, I mean, I think it's amazing. I think it's amazing that they all talk about it so much. And to be honest, I think it's more of an expression of like potential like intense female friendship than it is romantic love. But they're still expressing that through like having girlfriends. And I think as I've got older, I'm somebody that would probably now comfortably identify as being bisexual, but I didn't know that as a teenager. So like my first kiss was with a girl, but it was very like, oh, this is just for practice. Oh, we're just practicing.
Sure.
And like you don't talk about it. It's not spoken about. And the first proper boyfriend that I had went to a very conservative church, and he is gay. And he was gay then. And like maybe I kind of subconsciously knew that. And I love this person so, so deeply, and we are still friends to this day. But when we broke up and I kind of had to force him to admit that he didn't want a girlfriend, I remember feeling like I had failed at some kind of innate like femininity. And I remember being like, people at school going to think I turned him gay, which is not true at all.
Not how it works.
Like, I'm pretty sure if we had choices in that, we would have made different decisions. But I remember thinking like, oh, I've innately failed at something.
Right.
I've innately failed at like being a girlfriend. It's like some version of femininity that I've not done. And this person is rejecting my version of femininity. And, you know, I'm talking this is like 16-year-old brain.
Yeah,
like,
of course, yeah.
Nearly 10 years on, I can look at it differently. But at the time, I was like, oh, I've done something wrong here. And I couldn't quite figure out what that was.
I think it's interesting. You started off talking about your experience, expectations as a woman in the church, and that feeling of servitude. And I think like it's interesting. We often talk about in terms of I hear it parroted a lot, the idea that there is a crisis of masculinity in the church. I mean, there's a crisis everywhere, but particularly in the church, and it seems to be related to this idea. These kind of men you're talking about who have like kind of this Christian man who's manly but like can profess love. And I think there's a lot of men who in churches are turned off by that, and so there's almost like there's this feeling that there's always a need for a men's ministry, and the men's ministry has to sit around and go, no, we can do meat.
Yes, climb something.
Run up a hill.
Like
Build something.
I have to assert that church is also a place for that, for some reason, and that feels like to have its own sort of crisis of confidence there. Simon, what about you? What do you think?
Well, I'm a little bit older than Rachel, because obviously I'm her dad.
Sorry.
You know, so
And so I'm looking back a little bit further, and two things are coming to mind. First of all, I had what is now not a rare experience of a very strong matriarch and a less impressive male role model, which was quite confusing for me. And I remember when Eddie Izzard said, oh, I see myself as a lesbian trapped in a man's body. There's definitely a sense in which I look back to the way I was parented and aspire more to the positive qualities of my mother than my stepfather was not wholly reliable. And it was not completely clear who was parenting who. So I've got this strange, like ambivalent, the strong, nurturing parent was my mother. And whatever kind of male I wanted to be, I didn't want to be a 70s dad.
Right.
So the next memory that I have is at my wedding, the vicar who was giving the sermon, who knew Anna and I quite well, we subsequently learned had a sort of seasonal wedding sermon. It was the kind of student church that you would know, which would mean the poor guy would be giving a sermon every Saturday for about 12 weeks in a row.
Yeah.
And he gave the same sermon. There was an element of it in which he talked about Anna being at home making the dinner,
right,
waiting for me to come home from work. And even then, it was a ridiculous image. And even though at that point, and perhaps for 10 years afterwards, I was the pioneering person and Anna was my supporter. You know, Anna spent a lot of time being Simon's wife.
Yeah.
And in terms of what I was doing church and new forms of church, Anna was in the background supporting me. That has obviously changed hugely, and now I spend most of my time being Anna Hall's husband.
Yeah, because I mean, how many BAFTAs have you won, Simon?
How many BAFTAs?
Well,
It's the family BAFTA.
the thing is, yes,
We've all got one.
we all got thanked. We all got thanked. I had to, although I did have to make sure that we would all get thanked. Yeah, but listener, my wife is a insanely multi-award winning documentary maker. Although at the time we got married, she was working as a secretary in a Christian charity. So things have changed a lot in that time. And I'm absolutely fine with that. And I don't understand, just emotionally don't understand. I think that initial foundation of having a mother who was absolutely the strength of the family, in that sense, it's just never been an issue for me. The feeling that I'm supposed to be the dominant person in the household. It's just not an instinct that I've had. I'm not a hugely competitive person. Over the years, I've counselled couples. I can think of one couple who essentially, not exclusively, but one of the main reasons that the marriage began to crumble was that they were in the same profession and she got a promotion that he didn't. And he was absolutely seething with anger over this. Just, you know, I was really, really shocked because this was a person that I'd known for quite a while, you know, church person, follower of Jesus. Just, this was something totally unjust, something wrong with the world, that his wife's gift should be recognised ahead of his. So I don't think I am a lesbian trapped in a man's body. I think I am someone who is comfortable expressing myself in a variety of ways, many of which have traditionally been identified as more feminine than masculine. I'm a very touchy-feely, huggy person. I'm very happy to talk about my inner life. And there was a point clearly where I thought that might mean that I was a more feminine person in a kind of deterministic way. Oh, perhaps I... Not that I would have ever identified as non-binary or trans, because those words were not in my dictionary at the time. But I'm definitely someone who's just quite comfortable being me. I don't feel particularly trapped.
This is the thing that's interesting, isn't it? Like, you're just evidence that there's variety. And also, you know, that you like your wife. Which frequently people talk about relationships in marriage as
Talk about bare minimum.
Yeah, as though people, like, it often, I remember a friend of mine saying, like, when you listen to the way that sometimes male comedians, particularly when we were growing up, would talk about their wives, it was like, why did you even get married? Like, if you like your partner and you love them and you value them and you fell in love with them for being creative and interesting and thoughtful and having loads of interesting questions, then when your wife becomes a documentary maker, because that fulfills all of those parts of her personality, weirdly, you think that's good. You're just like, yeah, because that's why you fell in love. It's a real strangeness, isn't it? Of like, oh, there must be a competitive thing because God forbid you like the success of your partner. Like, if that's the there's such a low bar to hit. But it's evidence of nuance, right? That actually, it's interesting because I think both your stories show that, like, oh yeah, actually we've at least talked about two different types of masculinity already. You know, a kind of what everyone says it is, and then how you actually experience it. You with the different boys at church being more expressive and you just being more like that. It's like we've already got two different types before we even started.
Yeah, it's interesting you sort of talking about your not feeling particularly sort of tied to one thing or another. Because I definitely thought for a while, just because I perhaps showed basic empathy, I wondered if I might be gay for a bit. But
Yeah.
but then like
Probably someone called you gay at school for showing
Oh.
some emotion somewhere.
routinely.
Yeah.
I also used to get called Jesus at school because, which is inaccurate on many levels. But anyway, yeah. But I think that there is that thing of we had reduced, certainly, like generally reduced gender roles to women empathetic servanthood, like you were saying, Rachel, and then men leader closed off, and that seems to be about it. And I don't hear much challenge in the church in that sense. Charlotte, what about you?
I think I said this in the patriarchy episode, but I have a strange upbringing because I became a Christian, but I became a Christian in a household that was completely unchristian. And then I went to work for Youth for Christ. So while I was a teenager in church, my church was a very, didn't talk about these issues particularly at all. And it was a Methodist church. So there were women ministers coming and going all the time. Our main minister was a man, but on the circuit, there were women coming and speaking. So I never thought that was weird. And my parents brought me up to think that women could do any of these things that men have traditionally done and should do them if they wanted to do them. And that's fine. Like, if you want to be you want to teach, you want to learn, you want to succeed, you want to be a doctor, you want to be a lawyer, whatever it is, you want to be in the army, go for it. I mean, my mum's a pacifist, so she didn't want anyone to be in the army. But if men were going to be in the army, she figured women could be in the army as well. And definitely part of the resistance, So I grew up with this kind of not really thinking that there were different roles. And then I went to work for Youth for Christ. And Youth for Christ was interesting because people wouldn't say directly that they didn't think women could minister. I think the line at Youth for Christ is that women can. But it was quite evident that more of my male friends got asked to speak, do that sort of leadership thing. And we were all training to be youth workers, but there was also assumptions that you would want to do children's work. Men frequently talked about how, when they got married, they'd love to marry someone who supported their ministry. There was an understanding of the sort of pastor's wife role. And Beth Allison Barr has a great book coming out called Becoming the Pastor's Wife and how that became a job. And it's a kind of like diversion of female ministry. It's like, yes, you're in ministry, but yours can be over here. And I would have conversations with people where they would tell me that I was a very strong woman. And then they would say, I know a strong woman and she's so supportive of her husband's ministry and that's how she shows her strength. Why do you need to be at the front? Which was really interesting kind of nuance of like, women can be strong. We want them to be strong, but we want their strength to be in a particular box. And I was told quite early on that I was the wrong type of woman for lots of reasons. Because essentially, if we really boil it down, I was a bit too masculine.
This is what I was going to say.
I was a bit too masculine.
Mm-hmm. Like this version of femininity. And it's interesting, like something doing the rounds on social media at the minute is this whole trend of like, when you start to like pink again, you're healing. And this idea of like, well, feminists have told us that we can't like pink, but we're going to reclaim it. And like just this, I don't look like a particularly feminine person. I don't wear dresses. I don't shave my legs. I shaved my head. I have very short hair. Like, I don't really wear makeup. I have lots of tattoos. I'm not a typically, like, feminine presenting person. And yet I feel that there is something innately feminine about me. But that isn't expressed through the way that I look. So you talking about, like, standing at the front, not looking like a quote-unquote pastor's wife, whatever vision comes to our minds when we say that, to me, that's somebody with, like, blonde hair and a flowery dress. And that isn't what Charlotte looks like. That's a really good thing. But, those boxes of what gender visually looks like to us in church.
Yeah.
You don't look like that.
No, and I was very much freed by, I was blessed with these feminist parents and people who asked me to ask questions. So when somebody did tell me I was wrong and I was the wrong type of woman and this was all wrong, I do remember having a conversation with God, as it were, where I was like, I don't get this. I don't know why you would, if all of this stuff that I want to do, that I innately do, people listening might have noticed I have a real problem not just being a bit of a teacher all the time. If this stuff that is innately me is not what a woman is meant to be, why would you make me like this? And before I had any language of transness or non-binariness or any of the things that we have now, I remember having a conversation with God where I was like, I don't get why you wouldn't have me born a man then.
Yeah.
If this is who I am, why would I be born like this? And so I had that gender crisis quite early, I guess, in my like I was probably 19 20, of that feeling of like, if this is what God says gender is, or what I was being taught it is, I don't fit it. This is just wrong then. Like, there's something really going wrong. And I've got two choices here, which is be this person that I am and endure just the pushback on that all forever, or give in and be something that I don't want to be. And I knew that I had to make that choice. And again, luckily, I was brought up with enough kind of like rage and spite and spunk or whatever it is to just be like, well, fine. You know, and I was already a metal or an alternative, and I think that did help that I already looked different.
Yes.
So I had a place to start from that was just kind of a bit rebellious and
You
a bit
were
like
already non-conforming.
Already
so
non-conforming.
Being gender non-conforming was just part of the package.
Exactly. It was sort of expected, but it was painful. It was incredibly painful, I would say, being in that space suddenly at sort of 18, 19 and going, oh, I thought I knew who I was, but clearly who I am is not okay. And also having to fight for opportunities. So that was the other thing that's ridiculous. Like, I'd watch guys who, quite frankly, were not as clever as me be asked to do stuff. And I'd have to be like, can I please do it? Please, I really think please.
Yeah,
and I think that massively
yeah.
knocked my confidence in general going forward. I think it's taken me till my 40s to bring that all fully back up and go like, no, this is who I am. Actually, this is fine. Without always being asking for permission. Can I have permission to be a teacher? We allow women to teach was a language I heard a lot. Charlotte,
Yeah.
you're being allowed to do it. Why are you still complaining? Who's allowing me? Who's giving me permission? What is
Right.
this? To be myself. We are a church that allows women to speak. Okay. Thanks for that. Thank you. And we're meant to say thank you as well. I was meant to be grateful if I was allowed.
Once again, if you're worried about how that statement comes across, try flipping the gender again.
That's right.
We're a church that allows men to speak. Like,
I do remember a time when all of that seemed natural
Yes.
and normal. And if a woman spoke, it would be a woman who had done something heroic in a masculine way, like a Jackie Pullinger.
Yeah.
A woman would very rarely be allowed to speak from her experience as a woman. She had to live up to a kind of Christian Indiana Jones ideal to break that mold. So the church that ended up in as a teenager would occasionally have a woman speaking, but they would be these heroic archetypes. This woman used to be a warlock and had 50 demons cast out of her. She has a story worth telling.
Yeah.
So just being a woman was not enough to give you the authority to speak.
No, and I think if I really want to interrogate what that has done for me going forwards, I don't think it's a mistake. It's partly that I just love studying the Bible. I don't think it's a mistake, though, that I did my PhD in Bible translation and not in gender and sexuality, even though these are the issues that I talk about and am most passionate about. Part of me knew I needed to get a PhD in something non-gendered, because then I am a valid biblical scholar.
Yeah.
Because at the time I started my PhD, I was still seeking that validation. So I was still seeking that kind of like, I just want to be valued as an equal. So what I did was I pushed down, it's internalized misogyny, right? So you push down the need to speak from the position of being a woman, and you go, no, but we're just all people. We're all people. We're all people. Let's not even think about it. And so I'm proving to you that I'm as good as a man because I have, and now it's very handy to have a PhD in Bible translation, because I can kind of, win in an argument. But it's interesting because it was like, even though at that point I would have called myself a feminist scholar, part of me was like, do something that the men can't say is lesser.
Oh, it's just,
It's
Yeah.
just
It's
X.
just
It's
a
just genre
feminist
fiction. It's just that.
playing their little
That's
tiny
it. Oh, she's just.
violin.
Oh, yeah. Of course, she got to do women's studies. It's not. It's not a real thing. But so it's interesting because that has had a knock-on effect to lots of ways that I've done things.
One of the things that makes me realise this thing that is told to us is eternal and natural and God-given is the way that it is becoming less, although as we prepared for this session, we've talked about the fact that right now there is actually a backlash to this idea that, hey, we can all be whoever we want, but we've inherited this idea that there are certain traits or virtues that are inherently masculine and certain traits or virtues that are inherently feminine. And yet, remarkably, that's not in the Jewish and Christian scriptures. There are just good traits and virtues. To me, that's remarkable because we project onto, 2,000 years ago, they must have been incredibly highly gendered.
Yeah.
Therefore, you would expect Christian men, you should be this.
Yeah.
And Christian women, here's a completely different, domesticated set of virtues for you to. There's absolutely none of that. And that's why these right wingers have to go back to Joshua. Be strong and very courageous, because that's all they've got.
Yeah. It's like weirdly the fruits of the spirit are not two sets of fruits of the spirit for genders, and the fruits of the spirit are pretty like kindness, gentleness, self-control,
and that's,
gentleness, guys.
Pretty threatening to our current, Andrew Tate version of masculinity.
It is interesting, isn't it, that like you have to go back a really long way. You're going to go, well, Genesis 2, male and female, he created them, so there's male and female, and you're like, and that's literally all it says. It doesn't tell you what those people do or what they're like or how they should behave, or like it's just a split of like biology. Like, but as essentialism goes, it doesn't really tell you anything.
Bible translation lady, just my understanding of the bit where in Galatians where Paul goes, and there's neither slave nor free, Jew nor Greek, and then I think in the Greek, quoting the Greek version of the Old Testament, he says, nor is there male and female.
Yes, it's and, not or.
So it's like this male and female thing. In the global, universal sense, it's the same level of...
it doesn't exist.
Some of you are Jews and some of you are not Jews. And we've already made clear that doesn't matter at all.
Yeah. On any sort of like essentialist basis, which is what we're really talking about when we start talking about a gender binary. We're talking about essentialism. These things are male and these things are female. There is no essentialism here. I mean, I'm avowedly like non-essentialist. I don't think we are born with masculine and feminine traits in that type of like, this is what masculine is and this is what feminine is. But also like the scriptures then give that away in that all the way through it, there are different men and different women acting in different ways. Right. And there's, and you'll get women who act in what we might, if we had a little framework of this is what masculine is, we've got women who act in masculine ways and we've got men who act in feminine ways, singing and dancing and loving their friend and being really emotional, and men who are afraid and who are weak. We got loads of those, loads of tired, weak, sad men. Barak and Deborah shows that, right? Like a guy who is like a soldier but is afraid, and a woman who is a judge and is strong and knows her mind and knows what to do. So it's like all the way through scripture you have these women and men who buck the trends of an idea of, say, a post-war, I guess, with what we're really talking about, a post-war idea. This is masculine, this is feminine, softness and weakness, and these sorts of, and homeliness are female traits, and going out and doing things and being proactive and those are masculine traits. We have it all the way through scripture, and we also have other genders in scripture. However you want to theologize those passages, what it shows is, from the very beginnings of people writing about gender, there have been multiple ways of expressing gender. Masculine, feminine, and then the others. And they're always there. It's a very popular thing right now, kind of campaigning for trans rights, to have a sign that will say, there's never been a world without trans people. There never has been. There have always been people who transition in some way between these categories of this extreme binary, masculine and feminine. There have always been people in that middle ground. In Greco-Roman society, quite often there are women who act in ways legally that are in patriarchy, in a legal position of being male. Sometimes we refer to them with male pronouns. Sometimes you see them in art dressed in male clothing. But what it does is it goes, it's just not a thing. So this thing we have where we're like, but there's always been male and female, and now suddenly we're all changing it. No, there's always been an acknowledgement, even in our holiest scriptures, that we need to make space for the people who don't fit this.
Yeah. It's all really interesting and completely explodes, for me at least, a lot of the dialogue around this at the moment. Mm-hmm. Because I think, and I'm interested in what you're saying about this as a sort of post-war consensus. What do you mean by that?
So you'll hear people say things like gender is a construct. Yeah. And it sounds like what we're saying is gender doesn't exist. There's no such thing as any of this and we're all just muddy. What we're really talking about is the ways that society builds categories. So gender is very real. If you feel female or male and you express that masculinity and you've never questioned it, great, it's real. How you feel about yourself and your body and the way that you explore it in society is very, very real. And those categories are very real and you can be judged against them. But they are different throughout society. And what happened in the post-war era, women had been in the workforce because men had been at war. And particularly in America, when men came back, they needed those jobs back because of the way that capitalism is set up. And so we created this idea in an expanding middle class, it was quite prosperous, of women staying home and men going out to work. So instead of the working classes where women have always worked in working class society, always. They've always been in factories, they've always been in fields, maybe less so in some ways because they would take time out to have children, but harvest time, everyone's there. There's never been an idea that a woman didn't work if you're working class. But the middle classes, we needed women to step back again. So we constructed an idea of the housewife.
Right.
With her lovely kind of perfect Doris Day outfit and her beautiful appliances that we wanted you to buy. And, and the man who goes out and comes home at the end of the working day from his lovely job in an office. But it is a construct. If you look at historical documents, women just 10 years earlier than that are in munitions factories, are working really hard, are doing physical labour. We've got this narrative that comes out, and that happens all through history. So we construct our ideas about what masculinity and femininity are that suit what we need in our society at the time.
Right.
And then those of us in society perform those roles. So we act them out, and you act them out at different levels to how they work for you. And for some people, they never work and they can't perform that way. And so those become kind of, people who are either trans, they perform their gender in a different way than they were assigned by society. Or for someone like me, I perform femininity quite well. I like dressing up, I like makeup, I like looking like that, but it's not essential to me.
Yeah.
Whereas some of the things that I do, like having my PhD, being a teacher, doing that, these are the essential things of Charlotteness. And then there's all the stuff I perform around it. And I can play with it and I can put it on and take it off. And so it's that sort of thing of like, we constructed a narrative because it helped society at the time. And now we're harking back to it like it always was.
Yeah, okay.
But it wasn't always there.
I'll say this, and it can be a self-contained bit, because I'm thinking of my Auntie Marguerite, not really my auntie. I'm having to look her up on Ancestry.com because she's a second cousin twice removed. Should I say they? Because as an adult, Marguerite became known as Radcliffe Hall, who wrote for most of their life rather rich and ripe Catholic devotional novels, but wrote a novel called The Well of Loneliness, which was a very autobiographical novel about being what then, we're talking about 100 years ago, was being an invert. And they ultimately lived with a woman, but expressed themselves by wearing a country gentleman's clothes, lived in a great house. This particular branch of my family was very well off. If you talk to the remaining Halls, they're very, very upset because all of Radcliffe Hall's wealth went to her lover and therefore went out of the family.
Oh, poor you.
So although there wasn't language to describe someone who was born as a woman but wanted to express themselves as a man and have romantic love with a woman, it was still there. And Radcliffe Hall was a Christian. And a spiritualist, because hey, it was that time. But that's for a whole other podcast series. We think that we're discovering things for the first time, but they have always been there, even if we didn't have the words for them.
Yeah. And quite often they were accepted because they're on a small scale. So one of the pushbacks we're finding now is it is political. People have started demanding rights. And quite often people were like, I didn't believe that things were going to change, so they lived quietly doing it. I mean, Gentleman Jack's really interesting. She's does get pushback in her day for the way that she's living, but she is also able to do it because she's just one woman.
Yeah.
So there's this feeling of like, we now have a much more joined up world. So quite rightly, people have found their voice and been like, we'd like to be accepted and known by society. But it's not that they haven't been there before. It's that we just haven't given people rights. We like, same with women, like it's kind of women have always worked, but they still had no rights. Then they started to demand rights, and then you get a pushback about what women's rights should be and how much they should be allowed, and all of those sorts of things. See, these things ebb and flow, don't they, throughout society? But yeah, they're not there.
And I think more people are, like, related to that, I think more people are exploring that aspect as more people. So there's a sort of perhaps a fear that's expressed in certain circles that, oh, everyone's gay now, everyone's trans now. It's almost like a trend kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it feels perhaps maybe more like people have discovered that it is a possibility, and that possibility maybe better reflects the way they see themselves. So I've had two friends in recent years transition, and like both of whom have connections to churches or have been, at least I've like grown up in church, and I think like it's I think it's been really interesting watching the people around them and see how those theologies develop, because as soon as somebody in your life is affected by it, you can't continue down the same path. Once that issue is material to you and it is real, then you either need to bed in or you need to change. And I think more people because of the cultural environment, I think that it's become easier for people to change around them. But
and I think it's really interesting that you bring that up, that actually sometimes people need to see somebody that they know confront them with that to think about it properly. And I remember when, Dad, you were doing this in church, of having the conversation of being inclusive. So I would like to marry gay people in this church. I would like us to open our doors to young people that are trans, young people that are gay, etc. And I remember so distinctly you like sitting at the front of church and being like, if you take away the words that you've been taught to be afraid of, so you take away the word homosexuality, you take away the word transgender, and just think about it as difference. You think about it as people that are different from you. And you said, Rachel is different to you. She has a disability, and there are examples of disabled people in the Bible being turned away from the temple, and none of you have turned my child away. You are in relationship with her, you know her, you love her, and also you understand that being disabled is not something that she chose. She is different from you, she did not choose that. How would it feel to know Rachel, to love Rachel, to know that, if she could change this about herself, she might. Would you turn her away then? And I remember looking around, essentially at this group of adults, like I'm still, a teenager at this point, looking around at this group of adults and seeing people go, oh, no, I wouldn't do that. And humanising it in such a way and going, maybe these people wouldn't choose this persecution and this really, especially in church spaces, really, really difficult thing to figure out for themselves if they had a choice. Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. But there's no denying that it's difficult for them. And just looking at their faces and them going, yeah, we wouldn't turn Rachel away. And I remember that just being such a moment for me of like, and I remember sitting there realising the same thing and going, it is just difference. And we've all been in Christian spaces where people that are trans, people that are gay have been villainised and they're sinful or they're this or they're that. And we've been kind of made to feel that we shouldn't be in a relationship with them.
I think we've also been made to feel like we're going to lose something essentially Christian or essentially godly if we accept X, Y, and Z. One of the questions always is like, for me, is why are people worried about it? What are they afraid of? What do they think they're going to lose? And there's a sort of, well, if you tell that person that you love them in spite of that thing, you're somehow welcoming sin in, or you're disrupting something that God has put in place. And God becomes very small then, I think, for me. Yeah. like that I have to be the arbiter and the judge of what is correct in gender and sexuality. I've got to draw the line in the sand for these things. There's a lot of slippery slope arguments of like, you know, where will you end up? I mean, with women in ministry, you know, that's where it all starts. Somebody said to me once, what if there's so many women ministers that there aren't enough jobs for male ministers? Which was like such a sense of entitlement.
Right.
And I think entitlement does come into it, both in sexuality and gender, of like cis people and straight people are used to being centered, and there's a kind of like, well, you're taking away from me, like, where are you taking away from me? But such a sense of entitlement. But also, I think I replied very sarcastically with the Bible verse, you know, whatever it is, the harvest is plenty but the workers are few. You know, when everyone's become so Christian that there's not enough jobs for ministers, then fair enough. But it's an odd, like what, have you converted everyone in the town already, and you don't need any women to preach the gospel? Is that what happened?
Right.
But there is a sense of like, what are people losing? What are people afraid of? What are they worried about? With gender, you know, are you worried that your gender expression is wrong? Do you feel like, are you being made to feel like you're wrong? Or, you know, being told that these people don't want you to be yourself anymore? That kind of what's at stake question is interesting, because that is how it's being peddled to us, I think, there's a danger from this. Something's dangerous about it.
There's four of us sitting in this room. Dear listener, you might hear crackling or rumbling, as Rachel was very beautifully remembering a good sermon that I preached. The sky began to cry.
The heavens opened.
But just there's four of us, and here in this podcast, one person has identified as gender non-conforming, another person has identified as bisexual, and I can hear a voice saying, "Oh well, you know, everyone's at it now. Everyone wants to be something." Or, you know, you go to school and there's barely any straight kids anymore because they all want to be LGBTQ. Sorry, I'm putting on a bad accent, but. You know, and it wasn't like that, allegedly.
Yeah.
But I think the reality is it was. Maybe if you're 15, it might be cool to be queer for a bit. But honestly, nobody chooses to be, you know, picked on for the rest of their lives, because that's the reality. We are all different. And the idea that we're all this thing or another, it just doesn't seem real.
No, because what else in biology in the world generally is that rigid? There is no black or white. Yes, there are trends, but there is no this is always this is always that. And you just, I mean, you talk about the eunuch example. Well, there are biological eunuchs. There are people born without genitalia. That is just, that's a biological fact. And
what Jesus says in Matthew 19. Some people are born eunuchs.
There
some
you
people
go.
are made eunuchs.
There you go.
Like...
And it's a failure of language.
Yes.
Rather than a failure of belief.
Yes.
I think also it's a failure of communication. So that thing of like, oh, young people today all want to be something.
Yeah.
And like the young people that I work with, lots of them are autistic, lots of them have ADHD, lots of them would identify as being LGBTQ plus in some way, but arguably that's because we're talking about it more, so they feel safer to say, oh, actually, I feel like that too, whereas what we're all talking about, and I'm only 25, but what we're talking about is our school experiences. There was no, you know, to be gay was to be picked on, which is what you've just said. You would be laughed at, you'd be shunned, you wouldn't have any friends. That's how you would be made to feel if you came out as gay at that time. I think it's great that we're in a day and age where kids can go to school and openly say that they have a girlfriend. It might feel like to us, the people that are not in school, that there's an oversaturation of young people that are claiming to be one thing or another, but we know so much more about ADHD than we did 15 years ago. We know so much more about what it means to be dyslexic than we did 15 years ago.
Yeah.
The reason why it's coming out more is because they're talking about it more.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think someone's saying, why do all these young people have to label themselves? It's like, if you would rather live in a world without labels, that's great. Then let's get rid of masculine and feminine as well.
Right.
Let's just let everyone be who they are. And sometimes it's helpful that people can describe themselves and And if they can choose their own label, that's fine. But if you want to live in a world in which people don't label themselves, stop trying to box them into just two boxes and let each person be who they are.
Yeah, because at some point, if you're that rigid, somebody will have to break out of it and create something else. They'll have to. Like, say, we've always had extra genders in history because at some point someone doesn't conform. So even inside of the categories of masculine and feminine, and what people, if you want to define that, for example, as what is a woman, if you want to say, well, a woman is a person who can carry a child, then we created the category of the barren woman because we had to. Because not all women can carry children. So you always have to create this, like, another category of a thing. You've got to describe it some way. So you're always going to do that, aren't you? You're going to buck the trend somewhere because it just doesn't work. That sort of straight down the line. Here's what things are. Here are these labels. My mother and I talk about this a lot because she's 70. I want to say she's 75. I might be underselling her, but she's 75, and we've talked about these things my whole life. She's an incredible feminist and campaigner, and she's always said she didn't quite know what people meant when they said, this is what a woman is. And I've said, I've always admired my trans women friends who know themselves. They've done so much work on themselves that they're like, yeah, I know who I am. But also some of them now would be gender non-conforming, but to get any help, they had to state so clearly that they knew what a woman was. Because we had a category of male and female, and so to get any healthcare, anything, they had to be like, quite often are forced to perform femininity in an extreme way. Because a woman looks like this, so you end up going, if you've got to live as a woman to get any help, to get any mental health care, to get any help, like, supporting you in your transition, to get any kind of hormone treatments, anything, you have to perform it in a way that we, the cis people in the world, have decided is enough. Prove yourself, prove that you're female enough. So, one of those sorts of criticisms often is like, well, trans women are all like this, which they're not. It's just always people who've never met a trans woman. If you have to perform to the binary to get any help, you'll reinforce the binary. And we all will. I've done it. To be accepted in a classroom as a female biblical scholar, I perform a certain level of femininity. I put makeup on. Like, I'm sat here now in a pair of combats and a jumper and no makeup, but I've performed femininity to be accepted because we know that women are more likely to get jobs if they wear makeup than not wear makeup, if they're thinner than fatter. Like, these are real, actual things that happen because of our categories of male and female.
Funnily enough, I mostly perform masculinity when we've got a workman round.
Yeah. No, absolutely. My husband, I remember saying to him once, he had a workman voice.
Yeah.
He had a voice for talking to workmen with, because, you need to be accepted and you need to be respected. So you perform it. And it is a performance, right? I
don't know who's going to listen to this podcast exactly, but I'm hearing the voice of someone saying, yes, okay. There are all these differences. I accept that. And I'm not going to deny how you feel.
Yeah.
And yes, sometimes in a small percentage of people, there are differences in sex development and things like that. But God made male and female, and everything that differs from that is an accident at best and an offence to God at work. That I just feel it in my bones. On a level of natural theology, you need the opposite genders to come together to make babies. I accept this reality, but surely the true, good, godly principle is a man and a woman together making a baby, raising that baby. And maybe in society we can all be friendly and nice and inclusive, but we can't get away from the reality that this is how God has ordered creation.
Well, we need a womb and we need semen. I think we do then have to get to, again, away from categories of what is happening in a body versus what is happening in your expression of yourself and your qualities and your personality and your hormonal makeup and how that, like, all of those things are variables that we all know people who aren't the same. I have lots of male and female friends and not one of them is exactly the same person. To have a baby, you need a womb and you need an egg and you need sperm. I don't think anyone's ever pretended that that's not the case. No scientist anywhere that I've read, nobody's trying to deny that that's the case. But how that plays out and how somebody should live that way, we're talking about something completely different. So the problem that I guess I have there, and the nuance on it is like, yeah, this seems to be how bodies are made. But what we have then done with that in society to these categories that restrict one set of people massively, bless another set of people massively, and then we can say restrict those as well, you know, in certain ways. Patriarchy is bad for men as well as women, blah, blah, blah. I think it's a big jump from God created male and female in Genesis 2 to this is how men and women have to be, this is how they have to act, these are the only people, and we have to keep those bodies exactly the same so that we can have a bunch of children. Partly because we're massively overpopulated the earth now, so it's fine. There are enough children, you know? All of those rules in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, those sorts of rules are about a society that needs children to be able to farm, to be able to do things. I'd say as well in Genesis, that bit, he created the male and female, comes at the end of a really beautiful poem of binaries. And this is a theologian, trans theologian called Austin Hart. He points this out, but other people have pointed out as well. Those binaries, day and night, land and sea, you know, birds and fish, are all things that we all agree exist, but we don't agree that they're the only things that exist. There is a shoreline that goes in and out. There is dusk, there is twilight, there is dawn. There are fudgy edges to the whole of creation. There are fish that couldn't seem to be able to fly. There are things that we now have, dinosaurs that now we know had feathers. There are, like, there's all of these variations in between the binaries that are in that poem. And this is the only one that we're determined to keep as clear cut as that. We have to ask ourselves why we want to keep that and why we're worried about it. I can't answer that for you, but like, if you're listening and you're like, it just makes me feel weird, it may just be that you're fine in your gender, and you're allowed to be. You're allowed to be exactly happy in your body, being male or female, and feeling very much. I have a friend who will say to me, I know I'm a woman, I'm such a cis woman, and has lots of children and has been able to do that, so that hasn't been a problem for them, and they're great, and they love it, and they're happy in it. But other people and other genders don't threaten that. You're not actually being threatened. Nobody wants to take away from you your ability to be male or female.
I think that's a great place to end there. And there's probably a lot of people who will be shouting patriarchy at them. And it's like, why? Patriarchy. Which is the answer to every
Isn't
question.
it always? It's my answer to every.
Thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss an episode. Episodes are normally released every other Monday, but because we've recorded so much on this topic, part 2 will be released next Monday, 23rd of March. We'll be taking a deeper dive into the Bible to look at how gender and sexuality is talked about in Scripture and its interpretation. Our Q&A will then follow on Monday, 30th of March. Please get your questions on gender and sexuality by this Friday, 20th of March to feature. You can message us via our Substack, Facebook or Instagram, or email us at agodwecouldbelievin@gmail.com. A reminder, if you'd like to support the project, please make sure you share it widely, and you can patronise us by subscribing to agodwecouldbelievin.substack.com. Here you'll also receive bonus episodes and regular reflections from Simon and the team right to your inbox. We'll see you again very soon.